Hi, welcome to S3 at Grace Church. We are glad that you are here. S3 stands for Song, Scripture, and Sermon. It's meant to be a worship experience that you can not only enjoy with your loved ones, but also share with friends and neighbors as well. We are glad that you are here for worship as we explore what it means as people of faith to consider the fact that life is in fact very good.
Make time to be holy. Make time to speak with the Lord. Abide in Him always and feed on His word. Make friends of His children. Help those who are weak. Never forgetting His presence to see. Make time to be holy. The world rushes on. Acknowledge His presence in company or alone. By looking to Jesus, His path you will trod, and your friends by your behavior will experience God. To be holy, let Him take the lead. Don't run on before Him, whatever you think you might need. In joy or in sorrow, still follow the Lord, and looking to Jesus, still trust in His word. Watch your thoughts. Watch your words. Watch your actions. Watch your habits, and watch your character. Watch your character. Watch your character. It will become your life. Your life. Make time to be holy. Become in your way. Notice each thought and motive. Allow them under His sway. Thus led by His Spirit to fountains of love. Be fitted for service in the kingdom of God.
Amen. Wonderful. Thank you, band. Thank you, as always, for your music ministry. Our reading this morning comes from the Old Testament. We'll be reading from the book of Daniel, and I'm going to start in chapter 6 with verse 10, and we'll continue through 13. Although Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he continued to go to his house, which had windows in the upper room open toward Jerusalem, and to get down to his knees 3 times a day and to pray to his God and praise him just as he had done previously. The conspirators came and found Daniel praying and seeking mercy before his God. Then they approached the king and said concerning the interdict, "O king, did you not sign an interdict that anyone who prays to anyone, divine or human, within 30 days except you, O king, shall be thrown into the den of lions?" The king answered, "The thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Then they responded to the king, "Daniel, one of your exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the interdict you have signed, but he is praying his prayers 3 times a day." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, I want to welcome you again to worship this morning, and so glad that you are here. Many of you have been participating in worship all throughout this early beginning to 2021. We have been talking about what makes a good life. The sermon series is called Life is Good. Wanted to start off the year on a positive note. We had all been talking about how eager we were to turn the page on 2020, to move into a new year, and to look forward with optimism into what the year ahead held. Now, let's be honest, like Lynn said in the children's moment, the battle continues. The struggles go on, and many of the hardships that you had experienced in 2020 have carried over into 2021. And there was never any promise that because we entered a new year that things would go away that troubled us. And yet, I've been very purposeful in trying to bring a message of hope and encouragement each week, and I hope that you have experienced that through the scriptures, through our worship services, and some of the things that we have been talking about that hopefully lead us to recognize that despite all the things that are going wrong and the things that we could easily name that are going wrong, there is very much to celebrate and so much that is good around us. We talked about statistically how that's true in terms of some of the big measurements of things that are happening on a global scale. Things seem to be getting better as time goes by. We were talking about how we find our place early on, and that sometimes second place feels like maybe the worst thing that could happen because it was so close to being in first place. But if we are practicing our faith well, then we'll recognize that our position is always going to be in second place because we point to Christ and allow Him to take first position in our lives. We talked about different formulas. We talked about different practices. We talked about things that could make us happy, and we talked about wellness and flourishing. And today I want to finish it all up by talking about some little things that we can do, some tweaks that we can make that might actually lead to a more fulfilling, hopeful, and better life where we recognize life is good around us all the time. So if you think about our lives, and I think that the song lyrics that you just heard and that Andrew penned spoke so well to this. If you think about what it is that we experience together, we look at our life, right? And that's sort of the biggest unit of what we are measuring. We look at our life in its entirety. But then if we want to break down our life, whether we see our life as positive or a struggle, good or bad, negative or hopeful, we break down that and we look at the smaller units, right? We look at things like years. And then we look at months and weeks and days. And then if we want to break it down even further, how do we evaluate what happens in a day? And how do we break down our lives? What are the building blocks of our lives? Well, it's not just days. It becomes our routines within those days. And we break that down even further and we get to habits and practices.
And that's the thing that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the little things that we do, those little practices, those habits that we begin to take on in our lives, and how when we look at those things on the most tiny level of our lives, that when we start to layer our habits, and our habits become our routines, and our routines become our days, and our days eventually become our life. And so when we feel like we don't have a lot of control, I think the place to go back to is the earliest sort of building block of that. So as one of my colleagues and mentors says, Ron Martoya, he says, our days are our life in miniature. Think about that. Our days are our life in miniature. And if we can begin to control some of the things in our days, in our life, instead of letting them control us, we can begin to curate, to build, to layer upon those things a life that is a life that we choose to participate in, to one that we are excited about, one that feels satisfying and life-giving to us. And we begin, I think, with greater clarity to recognize that life is good. So how do we do that? Where do we begin? Well, I read to you from Daniel, which is kind of an interesting book and maybe a peculiar choice for what I want to talk about today, but bear with me, I want to explain. So you remember part of Daniel's story is that Daniel is one of the thousands of people who find themselves exiled. They were originally in Jerusalem, they were taken away, now they are living in a foreign land, under foreign leadership. But Daniel and some of his companions, who you may remember their names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are people who have risen to the top, right? They are people who are recognized by the current leadership as being people who have a lot of intelligence and wisdom and something to add. And so they become cupbearers. They become leaders within the kingdom. And King Nebuchadnezzar recognizes this, and he begins to look at Daniel, and Daniel is rising in the ranks. And so first he is met with a great deal of jealousy from his colleagues, and they find a way to trap him. And they say, well, maybe the king should declare an order that everybody should worship a golden idol. But Daniel refuses to do that because Daniel is a devout Jewish person. He's a Hebrew person, and so he is not going to bow down to an idol that violates one of the commandments. He's not going to do that. So his colleagues find a way to trap him and to make sure that the king declares that everybody has to worship this idol, and so that doesn't happen. And so he and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get thrown into the furnace, and they don't get burned, and they survive that. Nebuchadnezzar is amazed. He has his own issues, but then a little bit later on in the story, he dies. Well, then the next king rises to power, and here, lo and behold, we find ourselves in a similar situation. Daniel gets on the king's good side. Everything seems to be going well, but then everybody's jealous of Daniel within the ranks, and so they convince the king to come up with a second edict. And this one will be that everybody should only worship the king. Everybody should bow down to the king and nothing else, no other entity, no other deity, no other shrine, no other idol. But only the king can be worshiped for a period of 30 days, for a month's time. Well, that's when our story picks up today. So it says that Daniel, knowing that this decree has been issued by the king, still goes into his room 3 times a day, where the windows are open and face Jerusalem, and that is where he falls to his knees and prays to God 3 times a day. Now, mention of different kind of habits or daily routines are actually fairly scarce. In the New Testament, of course, we find a whole lot about the character traits of a Christian person. We should be like this, and we should avoid doing this, and this is the kind of thing that we should take on, and this is the kind of person that we should aspire to be as a Christian person. But we don't always get the how. We get the, this is what you should become, but how do we get there? Well, Daniel's story actually is one of the places in the Bible where we hear of somebody who has developed a routine or a practice. He is now in the habit of praying 3 times a day. And I don't think that this is something that Daniel just took on once the king decided that only everybody should worship him or him alone for 30 days. I think that this has been a practice of Daniel's for a long time. And that's how those who were jealous of him, who were conspiring against him, felt like they had found a way to entrap him because they had observed his behaviors. Daniel had done this as part of his daily ritual and routine. These were habits for him, and he found that he needed to pray morning, noon, and night, 3 times a day. And so here we have, in ancient biblical times, the example of somebody who has developed habits that become a routine, that become his day, that become his life. And even when times got particularly challenging, Daniel stuck to his habits. And even in this story where he knows his life is being threatened, he sticks to his habits. And through thick and through thin, they were what he chose to practice. Now, it ends up that the king says, I can't do anything. I ordered this order. Daniel clearly violated it. He needs to be thrown into the lion's den. And you remember what happens. He survives that ordeal as well. But if we think about habits, this is kind of a trendy topic. I got an email just this morning about how to develop healthy habits from the group that is in charge of the health insurance that I get, right? So this is something that is being promoted fairly regularly. You've probably heard about this. And whether or not you recognize it, you have habits in your own life. Most of us could probably come up with some of the bad habits that we have. I still have many bad habits. I'm probably not going to share some of them with you, but I know that some of them are, I have bad habits around, I probably speed in the car way too often. I know I still bite my nails, which I probably should have given up before I was a teenager, but I still do that today. I hold my pen and pencil incorrectly, even after I was taught how to do it differently. And the list goes on, right? We all have bad habits. You have them, I have them. But do we think about good habits enough? In 2018, an author named James Clear wrote a book called Atomic Habits. And this book, since he wrote it, has become a very powerful book with well over 1 million copies sold. In fact, in looking at Amazon's 2020 bestseller list in the last week of 2020, on that list, he was number 3. That book, Atomic Habits, was number 3. Now, on the year as a whole list, it ended up being somewhere in the 20s. But still, I think it speaks to when you are on the top 20 list on Amazon and on the New York Times for nonfiction, you're selling a lot of books, which says that this topic is something that is very interesting to an awful lot of people. He has over 1 million website hits every month to his website about habits. And he is in regular consultation with Major League Baseball, the NFL, and the NBA. So he is clearly sought after as a person who knows what he's talking about when it comes to developing habits. And so his book is a couple hundred pages. It's a fast read. It's an exciting book, and it's very interesting. And I encourage you to check it out. But I'm also going to give you a little bit of a summary Cliff's Notes version of what he talks about when it comes to how do we develop good habits in our lives. Now, there's more in the book about how to get rid of bad habits and about how our brain works and about the kinds of things that make for good habits. But I'm going to show you this list right now. And so we've got a slide of that. Here's how he says you create a good habit. The first thing that he says, the first step is to make it obvious. Then you want to make it attractive, then make it easy, and then make it satisfying. So let me give you some examples of how that works. So make it obvious. So let's just say, for example, that you wanted to start off with a new habit. He said, make the habit obvious. In other words, state what it is that you intend to do. And have something that you can clearly measure, that things that you will recognize that are happening. So, for example, a difficult thing to take on as a new habit that wouldn't be so obvious is, I want to be a better person. Well, yeah, okay, duh. Everybody wants to be a better person, but that's not necessarily something that's terribly obvious. So let's say that your obvious kind of thing is maybe the bigger goal is, I want to live a healthier lifestyle. Okay, fine, but that's not obvious enough. What's an obvious kind of habit? I would like to be able to run a 5K, for example, right? So make it obvious. My goal is that after six months from now, I want to be able to run a 5K race, roughly 3 miles, right? I want to be able to do that. That's not something that people who don't run are able to do very easily. And if you're pretty fit, you could probably do it, but you will be incredibly sore and not very happy with yourself around mile 2.5. So how do we begin to do that? Well, you make it obvious, you state that goal. So the first goal is, I want to run a 5K. The next thing is, make it attractive. So how are you going to take something that probably you're not doing because there is something that is unattractive to you about this? If you are not a runner, this is not enticing to you, right? You say, if I like to run, I would be running by now. So how do you make running attractive? Well, he suggests that there's a couple of different things that you can do. One of the things that you can do to make it attractive is get yourself involved with a group of people who are doing this, that you enjoy their company. So find friends that run, or sign up for a runner's group that you think that you would enjoy the companionship and the accountability and everything else that goes along with the group. Make it attractive for yourself. It could also be something very simple, like something that you enjoy right before you go for your run. So, for me, maybe it's, I want to make a song or two playlist on my phone that are going to be that kind of pump me up music. What's a great song I can begin my day with? So as I get out of bed and I prepare to go for that first run, which is maybe running for 5 minutes instead of for 30, I'm going to listen to that song and it's going to get me excited, and that is an attractive way that I am now associating with this new habit that I desire to create for myself. Make it easy. So remove obstacles that are in your way. So again, don't start off with, I'm gonna learn to run 5Ks by starting to run 5Ks day one. No, maybe it's a lap around the block. Maybe it's just to see, can I run to the end of the street and back again? Maybe it's something as simple, and this is something that I started doing within the last year, is when I want to exercise, I want to lay out my shorts, my socks, my shoes, and my shirt right beside the bed in the morning, because I know that that is one less thing that will be able to convince me that it's not going to be a day that I'm just going to roll back over again and try to fall back asleep. It's right there. I don't have to go digging for it in the closet. I don't have to go into the laundry room and find it in the clothes basket. It's right there. It's ready for me. I can slip it on and I'm ready. So how do you make it easy for yourself? Take away as many of the obstacles as possible when making it easy. And then finally, make it satisfying. How are you going to find some satisfaction in what you do? How are you going to make small goals that lead to the bigger goal so that each step along the way you feel like there was some sense of accomplishment? I want to write a book. Okay, well, how are you going to be satisfied with maybe the day that you finish your opening chapter or your opening paragraph? Or maybe it's the day that you just come up with your thesis for the book, right? And in the case of running, maybe it's after my run, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to have a glass of water, and then I'm going to enjoy that cup of coffee that I love so much as my reward. And so you make it attractive for yourself, you make it easy, you make it satisfying, and that all happens after you have named your goal. And you can think of all of these different ways when you think about habits that you would like to take on. These are the steps that you take that helps it become ingrained as a part of how your brain is thinking about things, and you make it possible to do these things. Because most of the habits that we want to take on sound simple, but when we honestly set out to practice them, it becomes much more difficult. I want to read through the Bible in a year. How am I going to do that? That's the habit that I wish to start. Well, how are you going to make it easy? You make it obvious, you named your goal. How do you make it attractive? I am going to give myself a space that I create in my house that is going to be my reading area, or this is going to be my Bible reading chair, or I am going to light this scented candle when I do this because I'm going to enjoy that, or I'm going to play some soft background music that I like when I sit down to do this. I'm going to make it easy. I am going to buy or download from the internet one of these free applications that allows me to read on a schedule, so that I'm not leaving it up to myself with, I'm going to try to read 5 chapters a day, but instead it says, here's digestible sections that you can do that will break it down to an even kind of reading every day. How do I make it satisfying? What am I going to do after I do that? Am I going to journal about that? Am I going to highlight some of the things that are key passages that I want to remember again? How am I going to build this into my life to keep it satisfying? So you get the idea. So even when I think about Daniel's story, there's not a whole lot there, right? This story is not meant to be told as, here's how you create holy habits. But even as we think about what Daniel did, I think it falls into these different traits here, these different steps. Make it obvious. His goal was to pray to God 3 times a day. How was it going to be attractive? Well, he was going to open his shutters so that he faced Jerusalem, the city he has been exiled from. And in the process, he feels a connection to that place that he says is home. How does he make it easy? He's got the same space and the same time of day. He's got the time carved out. I'm going to do it at this time, and this time. I'm going to go to my room. I'm not going to have to try to find a quiet space wherever I am. I'm not going to have to find a corner where I don't try to create attention for myself. I'm going to go to my room where I have my prayer practice set up, and it's going to be easy. And it's going to be satisfying because I'm going to feel this connection to God in this daily practice. And I'm going to feel my continued kinship with the people we left behind in Jerusalem. So I think that even in Daniel's story, you can begin to see some of these habits taking place. I'm going to read a second reading to you, and this one comes from the Gospel according to Mark, from the 1st chapter. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. And he came and he took her by the hand and he lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and he went out to a deserted place, and he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I might proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. I share this passage with you because it's an example of even Jesus began certain days with his habits and his routines. He was overwhelmed by the fact that he had spent so much time and energy curing all of the people. It said the whole town gathered outside of his door. And he healed as many people as he could before he had to rest for the night. And then the next morning, in order to find centering again, he began this thing that we see a few times throughout the Gospels as a habit for Jesus, where he removes himself, he goes to a quiet place, he prays, he reflects, and then when the disciples finally find him, he says, "All right, let's do this again. We've got work to do. We've got hundreds of people to see. We've got people to cure. We've got people to teach. We've got a mission to fulfill." And he is able to go on and do that. And it's a reminder that sometimes when we develop these kind of habits, they're not just things we think about habits sometimes as the things that deplete us, but actually when we develop these good habits, they're actually things that renew our energy, that give our life greater meaning and purpose, that help set the tone for the day ahead or the week ahead or our life ahead. We have got so much going on in our lives right now. We're addicted to distraction. We're feeling that there are things that are being forced upon us because of this pandemic that make us uncomfortable, or that it feels like things are so much in upheaval and chaos. And it makes us want to control something. And so often our first impulse is to go to the things that distract or that kill time or that amuse us, rather than the things that are actually edifying to us, the things that actually help us to grow, the things that help realize that we need to be more grounded. We end up spending 15 spare minutes instead of doing something that feels like a good habit as a bad habit, and we whip out our phones and we scroll. We take an elevator ride, we pull out our phone. We wait in line at the cashier, we pull out our phone. We wait for something to happen at home, a conversation to take place, somebody to entertain us, our favorite program to come on, and we move from one distraction to the next. And so much of our day is filled up with 15 or 30-minute time blocks where we have no ability to account for what happened because we are so easily distracted, when we could be instead using this time to develop habits that give our life greater meaning, that ground us, that cause us, when we layer them one upon another, to not only take greater ownership and agency in our lives, but actually might lead to our practices and our habits becoming our days, and our days becoming our weeks, becoming our months, becoming our years, which translates to our life. And when we get a hold of those habits, as Jesus and Daniel demonstrate for us, we actually recognize that we have more ability to control our lives, and to control our lives in a way that allows the best things to present themselves, for us to be the best that we can be, and for us to recognize that life is and continues to be good.
Thanks again for being here with us for worship. We're glad that you joined us for S3. If you'd like to know more about the church, discipleship opportunities, or ways that you can serve, be sure to click on one of the links below. Also, if you're interested in supporting the church beyond your prayers and your presence, we hope that you'll consider giving financially as well, and you can find that link on our page as well. Thank you for being here. Have a great week.